You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Okay, so Donald Trump's own attorney issued a slip-up today in court that's going to cost him with the jury. But first, just a reminder for those watching right now, if you want to follow along with Glenn and I as we continue to do daily comprehensive coverage of Donald Trump's criminal trial, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, so Glenn, back to the slip-up. I'm going to read a tweet from MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman. An apparent slip-up by Trump counsel as he elicits from McConney that Weisselberg told him the money was for some sort of reimbursement. Remember, that is the DA's position, and that the paperwork disguised it as legal fees. And Trump wants to say that it was really legal fees and not a reimbursement. So what are the implications of this slip-up here?
So the implications are that Todd Blanche, the lead defense attorney for Donald Trump, who opened his opening statement was, ladies and gentlemen, not a reimbursement. This was not a repayment to Michael Cohen for laying out the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. He has now shot himself in the foot, and he has perhaps just shot Donald Trump's defense right through the heart. You know, the jury is getting the picture, I think, over and over again through all of the witnesses that have been called thus far, that of course, this was not, a legitimate legal payment to Michael Cohen. And we're going to talk about what some of the evidence was that came out today that proves that, I would contend, beyond a reasonable doubt. But then when Donald Trump's own lawyers kind of stumble into eliciting really damaging evidence on cross-examination of the prosecution witnesses, that is a really bad look. So part of the testimony that came out through the testimony of a guy named Jeffrey McConney, who is the controller of the Trump organization, is that Donald Trump's co-conspirator, let's call him what he is, Alan Weisselberg, who's presently cooling his heels at Rikers, serving a sentence for committing multiple counts of perjury, in part to try to lie and help Donald Trump in Donald Trump's other cases, civil fraud trial cases. McConney said, yeah, Alan Weisselberg told me that these were reimbursement payments. But, Brian, it only got worse. Michael Cohen made a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels to try to buy her silence. And then they went about falsifying the business records to make it seem like the money Donald Trump was giving to Michael Cohen wasn't to repay him for the $130,000. Instead, it was just income, right? It was just money that they were paying Michael Cohen for his services as a lawyer, his legal services. Here's the problem. Michael Cohen was out of pocket $130,000. So think about it. If the Trump organization, particularly Donald Trump, who was writing these reimbursement checks out of his own personal account, now gives Michael Cohen $130,000. Let's just go dollar for dollar. And he falsifies that payment as income to Michael Cohen. What happens? Michael Cohen has to pay taxes on that income, maybe to the tune of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. So when Alan Weisselberg said, wait a minute, these really were reimbursement payments, so you have to gross up the amount that we pay to Michael Cohen, so we're also covering the taxes that he will have to pay as a result of us fraudulently labeling this stuff income instead of repayment. They actually grossed him up all the way to $420,000. They wanted to make sure they could cover all of his taxes. And to me, Brian, it feels like they were giving him a little bonus on top of it, maybe just to keep him quiet, keep him in the fold. Obviously, ultimately, we know Michael Cohen left the fold and flipped on Trump and Weisselberg and others. So, yeah, this was a pretty serious slip-up in court, but I'll tell you, all of the testimony as it is unfolding is making clear this was big-ticket fraud. This was not doing legitimate business.
Is it not crazy that this slip-up was solicited during cross-examination? So it was from Donald Trump's lawyers with a witness who is friendly to Donald Trump. So these are two Trump-aligned folks who basically screwed themselves, shot themselves in the foot here.
Yeah, there is a cardinal rule, I would call it a cardinal sin. When you're cross-examining a witness, Brian, you never ask a question if you don't know what the answer is. And it looks like Donald Trump's lawyers, which is kind of in keeping with the performance of all of Donald Trump's lawyers, are stumbling and fumbling around and, they are hurting more than they're helping their client's defense.
Now, will prosecutors call this out? Will they tell the jury, look, Trump's lawyers told you that this payment was not a reimbursement, but rather just a legal fee. Now they are inadvertently admitting that it was a reimbursement. They're lying to your faces. Are they going to say that to the jury, or the prosecutors at some point?
They'll do it, Brian, but probably in an understated way. So first of all, we have to remember that a defendant does not have to put on any evidence at trial. The defense has no burden of proof. The burden of proof is always on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defense attorneys don't have to call witnesses, don't have to introduce evidence, and the defendant doesn't have to testify. Indeed, defense attorneys don't even need to give opening statements or make closing arguments. Of course, they ordinarily do. So anytime I had a defense attorney open on, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to prove that these were not reimbursement payments, and then I have that same defense attorney sort of bumble his way into eliciting on cross-examination of one of my witnesses, one of the prosecution witnesses, that in fact these were reimbursement payments, I will probably low-key it and say, first of all, let's go back to the defense opening statement, ladies and gentlemen. You remember the precise words that the defense attorney offered to you? Wait a minute, I have a transcript, so let me read them. And then I will read Todd Blanche's precise words. And then I'll say, now, let's look at the transcript of assuming we have transcripts, which sometimes we do and sometimes we don't when closing arguments roll around. In this trial, I believe they will. Now, let's read Todd Blanche's or Donald Trump's lawyer's words when cross-examining Jeffrey McConney, and then you squarely contradict it. And, you have to be careful how you play it. You don't want to be smart alecky. You don't want to be heavy-handed. But you're going to say, ladies and gentlemen, that's because the evidence proved that what Donald Trump, together with Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg, were involved in was rampant business fraud to try to gain unfair advantage in the 2016 presidential election. So you now know the true state of the evidence, not the hollow promises that Donald Trump's attorneys made during opening statements.
Glenn, what are the actual impacts on the Trump team's credibility with the jury? Like, they have proof now that Trump's team is lying to them. Do they lose credibility on all other matters, or am I being too simplistic here?
I don't think it's simplistic at all. Once you have lost the faith and the confidence and the trust of the jurors, you're in real trouble because your arguments are not going to resonate with them. They're not going to give attorneys, the benefit of the doubt when they're making representations about what the evidence might prove or what a particular piece of evidence actually means. So I'm not saying all is lost and the jurors will just tune out to everything Donald Trump's defense attorneys have to say moving forward after they were caught in what was a misrepresentation in their opening statement. At least it didn't play out that way during the testimony of the witnesses. But, the one thing that prosecutors always keep a keen eye on, it is their reputation with the jury. That is, for example, why during opening statements, Brian, we'll stand up and we will expose all of the warts, all of the shortcomings, all of the weaknesses in our case. I would have been the first one to say, just as the prosecutors did, Michael Cohen has credibility problems, folks. He lied, including under oath. We're not going to try to hide that. We're not going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. But what we are going to do is bring to your attention all of the corroboration, all of the supporting evidence and the testimony of other witnesses, so you will not have to rely on Michael Cohen's word standing alone for anything. That's what you do because that builds credibility with the jurors. And once they realize that the prosecutors are honest brokers of the facts and the law, warts and all, boy, that goes a long way when you're standing up in closing argument and rebuttal argument, urging them that the evidence really did prove Donald Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And we are asking that you return a verdict of guilty simply to hold him accountable for the crimes he decided to commit.
Now, another piece of big news that happened today in the courtroom was that Judge Maran also basically told Trump that he's run out of rope as far as his violations of his gag order are concerned. Realistically, does this mean that one more violation of Trump's gag order will result in Trump being incarcerated?
I would not put a nickel on that bet that Donald Trump will see the inside of a jail cell if he violates Judge Merchan's gag order an 11th time, because then there were 10. Today was the 10th count of criminal contempt of court that Judge Merchan found Donald Trump guilty of beyond a reasonable doubt. And yet, what did he say? He said, well, another $1,000 fine. What we now know, Brian, is there has been no appreciable punishment or sanction for Donald Trump's first 10 violations of Judge Merchan's order not to talk about and endanger witnesses, jurors, and others. Now, once again, Judge Merchan gave him a stern warning, do it again, do it for an 11th time, and you might see the inside of a jail cell. But there's something that Judge Merchan said that was infuriating to me. And let me read it so I don't misquote
exactly
it.
what you're going to say.
This is upsetting. He said, the last thing I want to do, he is saying to Donald Trump, is to put you in jail. You are the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. What did Judge Merchan convey? And I have been very supportive of Judge Merchan in the way he has presided over this trial, but you got to call it out when you see him doing wrong. What he said was, in substance, if you were any other Huck, any other defendant, anybody who did not have power, privilege, status, wealth, position, you'd be in jail, right? For 10 counts of contempt of court, you'd be in jail. But I don't want to do that to you. Why? Because you're the former president and you might very well be president again. That is offensive to the equal application of the rule of law. And it, made me a little bit nauseous when I read it. Now, on the upside, I believe if he does it again, and Donald Trump already stepped to the cameras at the end of the trial day today for his hallway lies session and said, I'm going to keep talking because I care more about the Constitution than I care about being put in jail. Well, bring it on, Donald Trump. Inevitably, he will violate the court's order an 11th time. And then the way Judge Merchan has set it up, he almost has to order him to serve at least some time in jail. Do you realize he could get up to 30 days for each count of criminal contempt? That means Donald Trump could have been ordered to spend 300 days in jail for his 10 criminal violations, and yet he hasn't spent a single minute in a jail cell. So I think when the 11th violation rolls around, and it will, on that I'll bet the full buck, we're going to see one of two things. We are going to see the resurgence of the rule of law, or we're going to see the rule of law draw its final breath and die. I, for one, sure as hell hope we see the resurgence of the rule of law.
Right. Basically, at that point, if you don't incarcerate Donald Trump, you're basically saying we're going to keep, saying that we're going to impose these violations, that we're going to, throw the book down on you, and then we're just not going to do it in the end. So, go for it. Do whatever you want. We're going to talk a big game, but, at the end of the day, we're really not going to do anything beyond imposing these $1,000 nothing burger fines.
And that will breed contempt and disrespect for the rule of law, and that will undermine the legitimacy of things like court orders and release conditions. And, that is actually what Judge Merchan said he's trying to prevent. Donald Trump undermining the legitimacy of the proceedings by continuing to violate court orders. Well, Judge Merchan will be guilty of precisely that if he doesn't actually punish, sanction, hold accountable Donald Trump for continuing to just completely run roughshod over the rules of the court and the orders of the judge.
Well, you put it correctly when you said when, not if, he violates his gag order for an 11th time. So we'll keep an eye on that. As soon as that does happen, we'll be here to go over what's going to happen as the result of that. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.